All right, so for the recording, start again. Yesterday we talked about some JavaScript fundamentals, and so today what I want to hit on is just introducing some Ruby fundamentals, some things you've probably seen before, just going over and kind of solidifying some of that. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about collections in both languages. So we'll have arrays, hashes, objects. We'll start talking about the difference between those, like how do we store some of the information that we're going to be like the data that we're going to be manipulating as we go forward. Cool. All right. So first question I have for you is, why do you guys think that we are teaching two languages at once? What is the point of that? Have we talked about that yet in here?
Makes you more marketable.
Say that again.
Makes you more marketable.
Yeah, it makes you more marketable. How so?
Oh, you know more than one language.
Yeah, you know more than one language. That's good. What about in the back?
Well, you call it being a polyglot.
Say that a little bit louder, please.
Some people call that being a polyglot, multi-language person. The idea is that like you don't want to be stuck in one language and only be comfortable with it. You want to be able to grow and be flexible in the way you learn. The counter argument is that you really won't master either one of these languages, which is probably true. And I would definitely rather just do JS. Go ahead.
So, all right, so that's a lot there. I'm just going to repeat it for the recording and for remote too, but and so we can talk about it a little bit. But one, I liked what you said. It stretches your learning, right? It forces you to, and that's a really important thing. I think John mentioned before, like the chances of you getting a job where you're actually writing Ruby, it's like, it could happen and it might not. A lot of people get jobs where they're not writing Ruby, right? And so they end up having to learn another language anyway. And even if your first job is writing Ruby, your second, third, fourth might not be. So just like moving through the tech world, the ability to pick stuff up like that is really helpful. Yeah, what were we gonna add?
The only thing I want to say is, you know, Ruby is going out of fashion, right? It has been, and it will continue to. So it's great because it's kind of like the child's toy version of the back end Rails, but like there's better things that everyone will have to learn in the next few years.
Sure. Yeah. And that happens all the time. Trends change, right? Something that's like the new hotness right now might not be even used a year, 5 years from now. Something that we're probably not paying attention to right now will be like the absolute thing that everyone has to use for the next 20 years. It's really hard to predict. It's really crazy, right? So just having this skill is really important. The other thing I think is great, and that I'm like a little jealous of you all learning two languages at once, which was not how I did it, is that you start to see what they have in common, right? You start to notice like it becomes a lot less intimidating to approach new technology in new languages when you start to see like the like common programming things that just exist in languages, right? Like variables, arrays, data types, stuff like that. And then really what it's going to come down to is some syntactical differences and some behavioral differences that we'll get into as we go deeper, right? So that's part of the reason that we want to teach you two at once, right? I think it really starts to make your brain sort of make these connections and learn in this kind of important way that you're going to have to continue to do if you remain relevant. Okay, so let's see. You're gonna have to bear with me. I have to use my terminal because my iTerm, my settings were not showing up, and I didn't want to change all of them. So we have to get used to using terminal again for a minute here. Okay. So. Sweet. Let's just ignore this stuff at the top right now. We're not going to use it right now. Okay. So I'm going to have JavaScript over here and some Ruby over here. And let's just go down and start talking about some of the similarities and some of the differences. So in JavaScript, if I want to make a variable, a variable that's going to hold my name. Someone talk me through how am I going to do that? JavaScript. Make a variable. It's going to hold Josh's name.
Do you want it to be permanent or do you want it to be alterable?
Up to you.
Okay, so just let.
Let. That's not it. Yeah.
Name of the variable, name, like my name equals.
Yeah, let's do my name because I think name is protected in Ruby. Equals.
Open a single quote, and then Yeah.
There it is. Sweet.
Also, you probably want to do camel case.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, so it was pointed out that we probably want to do camel case, and this is a thing that we're going to get into and that I constantly am having to remind myself. In JavaScript, when we name a variable, we want to use camel case. And the difference in Ruby, when we come over here,
You also probably want to put a semicolon.
so yeah, so the semicolons I think are becoming optional, but people have opinions about that. Okay. In Ruby, how am I going to declare? Let's declare the same variable in Ruby. How am I going to declare this variable in Ruby?
My name is equal to whatever your name, Josh.
You can change my name to whatever, that's fine. Josh, yeah. And so here we're seeing, this is called snake case, right? And so snake case, we're just putting a underscore in between all of our words. Cool, makes sense. Questions on that? All right, cool.
In Ruby,
yeah.
you generally don't end it with a semicolon.
Ruby, you do not use semicolons. No.
So you will break things in JavaScript if you don't end certain statements.
Some things need to have semicolons. JavaScript, yes. But in Ruby, you do not use semicolons. No. Cool. Other questions? No? Okay, great. Let's see. Great, some other things we might want to do. Let's see. If I want to print this variable to the screen, so I want to run this file and print it to the screen, what am I going to do to print my name?
Console.log, my name.
Sweet. And let's see that happen. So we will do node, and what did I call this? JS. Sweet. There I am. There I am. Ah, great. Does anybody know how to do the same thing in Ruby? So I heard print and I heard puts. Let's try both. So let's print my name over here. So when we want to run a Ruby, when we want to run a JavaScript file, we're going to do node. When we want to run a Ruby file, we're just going to type Ruby. And then again, the name of the file. Sweet, that seemed to work. So we had, what was that? Print. What was the other one I heard?
Puts.
Puts. There's, what do you, does anybody see the very subtle difference here? Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Who said it? New line character, right? So when we, what did we do first? Print. When we printed, it just printed it to the screen and then immediately closed out of the program and gave me my terminal back. Puts, which actually stands for put string, assumes you're printing a string and it adds a new line for you, right? Very subtle difference. There's actually one more, which you can just do P. Let's see what that does. And P prints it. It throws these quotes on, I'm assuming to tell us what data type it is, and also adds a line, right? All of these work pretty similarly. They have these subtle differences that you might want to be aware of, okay? If I'm trying to debug something, we're going to talk about pry in a little bit, but if I just want to see the value of something, I'll usually just throw P in there. But it's really up to you. All of them will work. Cool? All right, cool. So then we got that. Let's talk a little bit about math in Ruby. And so in JavaScript, if I do, so first of all of our math operators are the same, right? So we have plus, minus, let's see, minus, plus, we have multiplication, division, right? What am I missing? Exponents are this, and then I know I'm missing the modulo. Modulo, whoops. Modulo is the same. Oh my God, what am I doing wrong here? I'm pressing shift instead of enter, like a maniac. There we go, okay. Cool, am I missing any? So they're all the same. One thing that's very important for us to know, for you to realize in Ruby is that math, specifically when we do division, works a little bit different. So log, let's just console.log 3/4. Does anybody know what we're expecting to get here? Anybody a math whiz? That's all right. Let's run this. So we get 7.5, right? Seems pretty reasonable. Nothing to argue about there. Let's P 3/4 in Ruby. 0. What? That's not right. So Ruby does not deal with decimals by default, right? It does not assume a float. It will always use, it will always just round, right? If you want to use floats in Ruby, you have to specify it by adding 0.0. See? Make sense? And if we run this, boom, now we get 7.5, okay? It's a distinction just to be aware of. It's actually not a thing that you'll run into a lot unless you're doing stuff with like money, if your app is dealing with money, then obviously you're gonna want these decimals, right? Cool. Any questions so far? So Ruby has kind of a distinction between the way it deals with integers and floats. It separates them a little bit, okay? And it does not assume float. It does not assume float. Booleans are the same, true and false. When we want to do a comment, you can see right up here. In JavaScript, we have the 2 slashes. In Ruby, we have the little hashtag here. Let's see what else. Our comparison operators. Here they are in Ruby. There's one difference. Anybody see it? There's 2 kind of subtle differences. Are those not big enough?
Well, I mean, it's comment. Is that a comment?
Hold on.
Yeah, could you make it?
I'm about to do that right now.
Or should I kill the lights?
Yeah.
Is that better?
I'm gonna try and kill the lights.
Okay. Kill the light. Yeah.
There we go.
All right. Now we're learning.
I don't remember the name of the operator, but you don't have like the triple equals. You don't have like because there's not coercion inside of Ruby, from what I understand.
So so when we do equals, we're not using the triple equals, we're just using this double equals. There's an equivalent to the triple equals, which is, I think, calling dot. Well, I shouldn't even talk about this because I have to look it up. I think it's dot equal. Did I write it down? All right, I'll have to look it up and we'll come back to it. But it's not going to come into play today or in the next week or whatever. So yeah, we're using, and then I think in JavaScript, when we have not equals, we have bang equal equal, and here we're just doing bang 1 equal sign. Otherwise, these are working the same. Cool.
Bang equals exclamation mark. Yeah.
What?
Bang equals exclamation mark.
Oh, bang is the exclamation point. Yes, yes. Cool. What is this? Or, thank you. What is this? Those are the same. So you can see like all these similarities, right? So far, the differences that we've encountered are we have one way to declare a variable, and instead of having to decide between let and const, and some convention, really. I mean, if I create a variable and camel case it, Ruby will still read it, but by convention, we do not do that, right? So these are just things to keep in mind. Let's see. All right, so now we're going to get into some things that are a little bit different. So let's make a function that just prints, let's say it takes a name and it prints hello, that person to the screen. Cool, can someone talk me through how we might do that?
So
Let
name equals open parentheses.
So is this what we're going to call the function?
Yeah.
Let's just call it say hello.
Okay.
It's just a little bit more descriptive about what it does.
Okay.
Cool. And then parentheses. Name. So it's going to take a name, right?
Fat arrow.
The fat arrow.
And then brackets.
Sure.
And then You just wanted to just say hello.
I just wanted to say like hello name.
Okay, so console.log. Backticks.
Killing it.
Say, oh, well. Hello there.
Hello there.
Money sign. Bracket. Name. Close bracket.
Sweet. That looks really good. Let's try that out. So down here, we'll just say hello. Just keep talking to me. I like me. I'll save that. We're here. See it run. Sweet. Hello there, Josh. Nice. Does anybody remember? Can anybody talk me through how we would write the exact same thing?
Def.
Sweet. So this is
hello.
Ruby. Say hello. Jeez.
Then next line. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Yeah. Parentheses.
Yep, you got it.
Name. And then next line. Puts. String for this.
Yep.
Then hello there.
Do I need single or double quotes for this?
Single.
Single. Okay.
Hello there. And then hashtag. What is it? Yep. Name. Yep.
Cool. What am I missing?
You're missing the end.
Thank you. The end. Great teamwork on this. Let's run this and see what happens. Let's do another. Who wants to be said hello to? Josh. Okay. All right. We're all feeling really creative today. All right. Let's run this guy and see what happens. I think we're gonna. Okay. Oh no! All the way at the end. What happened? I need double quotes. Why? Because I'm interpolating. So we see what happened. If we do not use double quotes, it's just going to print everything there. It's not going to run any Ruby code inside of the string. So when we use double quotes, that tells it you need to run some Ruby code, which is this interpolation, before you resolve the string. So
if you weren't using a template literal or whatever you call it in Ruby, would you just use regular quotes?
Say that, you mean like if we weren't interpolating?
I mean, yes, I'd call that a template literal, but same idea, right?
Yeah.
Calling the like.
If we didn't have this, we could totally get away with and probably just use single quotes, right?
Is it cool if you just always use double quotes essentially then?
So people have different opinions about that. I know John is pretty strong on he always wants single quotes, unless you're interpolating. Cool. So let's run this one more time just so we can have the satisfaction of seeing it work. There it is. Hello, Josh. Cool. Okay, so I want to talk about a difference between the way methods return in these two languages, okay? So you guys might have heard the terms explicit and implicit return. Anybody heard that before? Yeah. So can someone talk to me about like what is explicit return and what is implicit return? Yeah, go ahead.
Really the fundamental difference, explicit means you have to actually call return. You actually have to write the word return in order to get the value out of the thing. Otherwise, you just won't get anything.
Mm-hmm.
Implicit means that by whatever place in your function that you created, when you actually have a place where you're going to have a return value, it's there. It's ready to go. You don't actually have to call it. So usually it's like the last thing, the last line.
Absolutely.
There is such thing as implicit return inside of JavaScript.
Right, we're going to get to it. Yeah. We're definitely going to get to it. It's relatively new, but we will get to it. Yeah, to summarize, implicit return, wait, now I'm going to get confused in my head. Explicit return is where we have to tell the function to return something, right? We have to say, you need to kick this value out at the end. Implicit is and the way it works in Ruby and the way we'll be talking about it is the last thing evaluated, the last thing in your method, that's what gets kicked out. Automatically, you don't have to call return, right? You can use the return keyword in Ruby, but it's generally best practice to do your best to have implicit return, right? So we're gonna take a quick look at how that works. So we're gonna refactor this so that instead of printing it in the function, we're actually just gonna let the function return this, and then we're gonna console.log the function. Does that make sense? So we're gonna console.log, and then we're gonna do say hello, and we're gonna put me back in there. Cool. So this is not going to work, right? Because in the way we have this function written, we need to explicitly say return, right? So this should work. Run this real quick. And we're going to get hello, Josh. Make sense? So the function is returning our string, and then we're immediately console logging it, right? Without the return, it would, I don't know if it would do undefined. Let's find out. Or if it would just do nothing. Undefined, right? Which means that it's undefined. So there's nothing there. Cool. So we have to say return. Now, something that's new-ish to JavaScript is the ability to use implicit return only with these, as far as I know, only with these fat arrow functions, right? And only if you do, create the syntax like this so that it is on one line. So see how we have these brackets here? A lot of the times we're going to be writing functions that are going to be multiple lines, right? We're going to have if statements in there, loops, right? And anytime we need multiple lines, we need to tell JavaScript like where our function begins and ends by putting these brackets in. Sometimes, like in the case of this, we really only have one line of code, right? It's going to run one line of code and then we're done. In that case, if I can fit my whole function on one line, I do not need my brackets. I can come up here and I can ditch my return, right? So this is now totally valid and it will work the same way. So we'll run it real quick. And we still get hello there, Josh. Cool? Don't worry about memorizing it right away, just something to be aware of. You can get a hold of implicit return with a fat arrow function in JavaScript if it's one line. Cool? Just keep it in your head. Good thing to know. The second you need multiple lines, you're going to have to put that explicit return back in. Cool? So Ruby, on the other hand, is kind of always trying to get toward implicit return. So if we, instead of printing hello in the function, we'll just print the result of the function. You'll see that since this is the last thing evaluated, that's what it will kick out. We could even do other stuff in here. I could set this variable x to 99. I could set like last name to Aleto, which is my last name. And it's still just going to kick out hello. Hello there, Josh. Cool? Make sense? Okay, well, what else did I want to say about these methods? Are there any questions so far? Functions, methods, pretty good. Okay, cool. Oh, last thing. Let's say we had, so in JavaScript, let's say this we're just going to call this, all this function does is say hello. And it doesn't take a parameter, right? It's just going to kick out hello. We don't need anything. When I call this function, even though it doesn't take anything, in order to call the function, I have to put these parentheses here. All right? Has anybody experimented what happens if I don't have these parentheses? What's going to log to the screen? It'll output the actual function, absolutely. So you'll get like a list of the function, or I mean a string of the function. So we have to put this here to call it. That is not the case in Ruby. In Ruby, all we have to do is write the name. So we can ditch this. We can ditch this. And you will very rarely, if ever, see someone end a function like this if it does not take parameters. They will just write this, okay? and then we can call it like this. And let's just run it real quick. Still getting hello there. Cool. All right, so that's some differences with these. We got on time, looking good. What's that? Let's do, I think we got pretty familiar with if, else, particularly when we were doing def grammar. So we won't rewrite the if, else in JavaScript. But I just want to show you real quick in Ruby. Does anybody know? Does anybody know? There's some subtle differences doing an if, else statement. Oh, it's just asking if I want to. I'm going to say install tonight for the 8th night in a row. Not good practice. If statement, we're just going to do like if true, do a thing, else, same, down here, do a thing, and then we always have to write end. So you're going to see like end is kind of taking the place of your closing, your open and closing brackets. The way we're going to end like a block in Ruby is by literally writing end. You'll see that come up in a couple of things. Cool. Else if, instead of doing else if like this, we're going to get rid of the E and it's else if like that. Cool. These are things that'll become second nature the more you do them. Again, they're not things I'm expecting you to memorize as I'm talking about them. Let's see. Cool. So loops. What kind of loops are we aware of in JavaScript? For, while, do while. There's for in. Which we'll get to. For of, exactly. So in Ruby, we have some similar ones. We have an until. So until x equals 5. Sorry?
I think there's an until in JS too.
Yeah, we said until, right? Yeah, we said until and while. End, right? This will go on forever because we're actually not. Right. So what do we think that, what is this going to do? Like if I run this, what's going to show up on my screen?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 should show up.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, let's just check. 4. So what's happening is, but yeah, right, totally. And this is a thing I get confused by all the time. This is going to keep running. It's going to print X. It's going to add 1 to X. It's going to run again. It's going to check, is this true? No, it's not true. I'm going to do it again. Is this true yet? No. Is this true? The second this is true, it'll stop running, right? While is like the inverse, right? While this is true, keep running it. Make sense? Great. Cool. All right, so now we got 2 more things to go over here. Our data types, or I'm sorry, our collections. So when we have a collection of stuff in JavaScript, what do we have to hold the collections? We have 2 things that we've been working with so far. Objects and arrays, right? My bad. Array, we do brackets. I'm sorry, we do curly brackets. Yeah, it's a mouthful. JavaScript, our arrays are going to look exactly the same, and they're going to behave the same way. So the word object in Ruby takes on a little bit of a different meaning. It's going to be a little confusing, right? we are going to talk about how objects work in Ruby. Everything in Ruby is an object. That is something that will make more sense the more you hear it and the more you work with Ruby, but just keep it in the back of your head. Everything in Ruby is an object. But the equivalent for our purposes right now to an object in JavaScript, as far as storing data, is called a hash in Ruby. And it works very similar, in a very similar way. That's a protected word, so we will not do that. Let's just do h equals, and we declare it the same way, right? And it holds key value pairs just like an object. So we can do like name, Josh. Let's do like city. What's up?
That you're in Ruby.
Right on. Yeah, I'm making a hash.
Well, no, but you don't put the colon in Ruby.
Oh, what do we? Oh, you're right. You're right. What do we do? What do we do instead?
The equal.
The arrows, right? Yes. This is a thing that trips me up all the time. So these look exactly, like fat arrows in JavaScript. In Ruby, they call them hash rockets. Whatever. It's just the arrow. We can just call it an arrow, right? So this just has two things in it, two key value pairs. Let's say I want to get my name. How would I get that? It's very similar to an object. So if you don't know, take a guess. Let's say I want to print the name H.
Open a bracket. What are you trying to, which one do you want?
I want my name.
So I guess we could go name, or does 0 work?
Let's try 0 and see if that works. Let's try 0. Nil. So that did not work. Let's try name.
You need the quotation.
There. Do I need the quotations? Let's see.
Yes.
So yeah, we're about to get into some kind of confusing territory. I'll try to walk you guys through it as easily as possible. Yes, we need the quotes. And we need the quotes because here what we've done is we've taken a string and made our key a string. So our key is a string, we need to call as a string. Another common thing to do in Ruby, and I do not want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but you're going to see it a lot, and it's going to happen when we get to Rails. This is how it's going to work. Instead of using strings as your keys, you're going to use what's called a symbol, which is it's a way of storing a value in Ruby. It's a little bit more specific than a variable. It like has its own ID attached to it. It makes it a completely unique identifier. That's basically as far as I want to get into it. A symbol is a completely unique identifier for a value. And the way we do it, there's two ways to do it. One way, this is kind of an older way, is colon, and then just whatever I want to call it. This is making a symbol, right? We can change this one. Sorry, city. Cool. So now when I come down here, because I've changed my key to a symbol, that's what I need to give. That's what I need to put in the brackets. So I'm going to do name. Pretty sure I'm doing this right. Let's find out. There it is. Cool. And I'm pretty sure if I did like a string, it wouldn't work. Just to double check. Cool. Other questions on this? Another shorthand that I'll throw at you, but please just do whatever feels comfortable until you get used to it. This is a perfectly valid way to do this. A shorthand for this, instead of, if you don't want to do these hash rockets, is to throw the colon over here. So now it does look a little bit more like JavaScript, but these have to just be, they cannot be, oh my God, what is the word? Strings. They cannot be strings. So this is still making them symbols, right? And when I call it, again, this is confusing. We're going back and forth. You still have to do this. Cool? Questions about this? Remote, you guys are good? Good. Oh, yeah. Thumbs up. Yes,
Just
question.
in particular for the shortcut, even though your object is, the colon is after the object or the symbol itself, in order to call it your colon is in front of the symbol?
Yes, I know, and that's what I'm saying is confusing. Yes, absolutely.
Clarification.
No, totally. When I'm doing it like this, what I'm actually making, as far as Ruby is concerned, is a symbol which we get like this, which I know it's a little confusing. But yes, great clarification
So
question.
you'll throw an error if you call it with the colon after it?
I'm pretty sure, but we can find out.
Or can you?
Maybe we can. Maybe I'm wrong. Look, as it did it. No, it hated it. All right. Sometimes it hates it. Cool. Yeah, you'll get used to this. You'll get used to this. And when we get into Rails, this will just lock in your head so fast, right? Even when we just start doing Sinatra, more Ruby we do. This will start locking in your head. Because we're going to be saving a lot of our data in either a hash or something that behaves very similar to a hash, right? Cool.
Josh, I
Yeah.
don't know what Rails is. So when we work with Rails,
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're going to be programming, or we're going to be using Ruby as our programming.
Yes, that's a great question and something I meant to cover, so I'm glad you brought it up. Ruby is not Rails, and Rails is not exactly Ruby, right? So here's the difference. Ruby is the programming language. That's the language we're going to be using. Rails is a framework. It's built in Ruby, so someone took a bunch of Ruby code and wrote a framework called Rails, which allows us to very easily set up and develop web applications, right? So when you'll see, when we start Rails, it'll write a bunch of Ruby code for us. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Cool.
Are we going to have an equivalent for JavaScript?
Yeah, that's another great question. So there are tons of frameworks for all languages, right? Rails is the most popular one for Ruby, but there's also I'm not sure if it's exactly a framework or if it's more, but there's something called Sinatra, which is written in Ruby, which again gives us a lot of tools to help us write web applications, and it's actually what we're going to start with to get going to build up to Rails. To answer your question, is there an equivalent in JavaScript? There are tons of equivalents in JavaScript. The one we're going to look at, the framework we're going to look at, is React,
Okay.
Which again is written in JavaScript and uses JavaScript, but is not in and of itself JavaScript. Cool.
Yep.
Yes. All right. Great question. Great question. Okay. Let's see. I want to take like a 5-minute break. All right. It's hot in here. When we come back, I just want to talk about some really helpful built-in methods for arrays and objects, and then I'll let you guys get to your challenge. So let's just take 5 minutes, bathroom, water, whatever you got to do. I'm sick of talking. We'll come back.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Right there. I gotta go in. I need to change my address on my letter. No. Okay. So you use this one. What's the lady's name who handled our PA stuff? What's the lady's name who handled our PA stuff? I don't know. No, the lady name that you guys that we sent like our VA stuff to. I'm talking GI bills. Yeah. Oh, I'm not on GI. Yeah, no. You're talking about Lily, are you? Yes, I think that is. Oh, okay.
Yeah, she did all the tutorial work.
Yeah.
Right? She was like the mentor. So did they teach you?
No one taught me anything.
Like,
what are you talking
Did
about?
you any JavaScript? Like aside from like just the fundamentals?
We had like a couple weeks of like jQuery we learned, and then yeah, I know no one uses it anymore. I think jQuery is pretty good to get your feet wet. It's like it makes like navigating the DOM a little bit easier and stuff. So it was nice, but I know no one uses it anymore. So
There's all
and
these methods
yeah.
pre-built into ES.
so you can do it all on ES6 now with like query selector and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
by ID.
So yeah, we did a couple weeks of it, but nothing intense. So like the first time I started, I sat down to learn React, and I installed like a node module, and then this just folder of like 5,000 different things showed up, and I was like, I like freaked out. I was like, this is way
All the
too much.
dependencies. All
Yeah.
that,
It just like was not a thing. And now, like the more I've learned about it, the more you see like the comparisons are amazing, like gems modules, right? So they're just implemented in a little bit different way. And so like once you get that's why I think it's so great that you're learning at the same time, because it's less intimidating. Because when I first saw them, it just didn't click for me right away. Like these are just gems, like or the equivalent of gems. You know what I mean? So yeah, I've been learning a lot of that stuff on my own.
Is it harder
To what?
to learn JavaScript?
No, I don't think it was. I think once I got going and once I started to see the similarities, it wasn't harder. It's just like a lot of practicing the syntax, getting that type. You know what I mean? If I'm writing a lot of JavaScript for like a week and then I go back and I start writing Ruby, so I have to kick my head back into Ruby gear. You know what I mean? So, but no, not really.
No, really.
I'm like, wow.
No.
It's just a little weird.
Yeah, no. So uncanny, right?
Yeah.
I like that shirt.
Oh, thanks. My university.
Oh, cool. Are we all back? Everyone is free. All right. So a couple more things. So what we've already talked about, just a quick review. We talked about some differences and similarities between JavaScript and Ruby. The way we declare variables, a thing to be aware of. We have some very similar types of loops, but we're using end instead of brackets in Ruby. What else? And we talked about some different ways to write functions. We talked about implicit and explicit return and arrays. And then we talked about objects versus hashes a little bit, okay? Working with arrays, working with objects or hashes is a thing you're going to do constantly, more and more and more as we go. And what you're going to find an extremely common programming task is having to iterate or loop through the data, your collection of data, right? We're going to focus specifically on arrays as we go through this. But because this is such a common programming task, there are some built-in methods, some things that JavaScript and Ruby already have that allow you to do some of these things a little bit quicker that are really good to be aware of, okay? So before I introduce these things, can we kind of talk through, and we're just gonna use like a simple for loop, how we would write a loop if I wanted to print everything. Let's do it in JavaScript first. I just wanna print, so I have this array right here of programming languages, and I just wanna log all of them to the screen, like one at a time. Can we talk through how to do that? Who can talk me through that?
So it'll just be, so we'll start off with a for.
Mm-hmm.
And then I is equal to 0, semicolon. And then
This is a case where no semicolon will explode if you do not use it. Go ahead.
then we'll do
I'll pull this over because this is going to look ugly.
I is less than programming languages dot length,
Cool.
semicolon,
Cool.
I plus plus.
We can do, yeah. We can do both. So we can do plus plus I. We can do I plus plus. Plus plus I has some performance advantages. For our purposes, we're not going to really see them. So both will work. Both will work. But it's just the order that JavaScript like runs the. So plus plus is actually like calling a function, calling a method, right? It's just we're not doing it in the traditional way we want. But it's just the equivalent of doing. I think you guys probably already know this, but it's I equals I plus 1, right? So this is really what it's running, but this is like the shortcut. So we could do both. What did we say? It doesn't matter. I plus plus. Both will work.
Okay.
Sorry. So keep going.
So brackets, and then we'll do console.log programming languages bracket I.
Sweet. And this is just as a refresher. When we want to access something in an array, we can get it by its index, right? And so what this is going to do, I is going to increase. We're going to keep getting the next index, right? We're going to start at 0, then we're going to do the next one. Let's run that real quick just for the fun of it. Is there a question? Oh, I'm typing this in. Do you have a question in the back?
I mean, you might want to cache the value inside of a variable, and then
Sure.
log it, just so it's more human.
Sure. If we were going to do this and we were going to actually like, so the way that we've been doing this, we're like console logging things in our methods and stuff like that. Preferably what we would do is, well, for this purpose, it's fine, but we could save a variable and then log it like that. Or something else we might want to do is, like we were doing before, where we were having the function return what we wanted and then kicking that out to the screen, right? So, but for us to do this and to get the list that we wanted, we would then be adding like a new line on it and blah, blah, blah. And it's more complicated than we need it to be. But yes, that is another way to do it, for sure. But just for our purposes, spit this out, this works. Cool? So this is such a common thing, having to go through each thing and perform some sort of process or whatever on each element, that there is a built-in method in JavaScript called for each, and it is basically what we just wrote, but condensed for you. And the way we do that, oh, and here, I want to show you guys something too. Great. So arrays in JavaScript. Oh, we can't see. Here we go. So these are just the docs for JavaScript. And arrays have their own special like thing, or their own special doc, right? Where we list like everything you can do with array, blah, blah, blah. But I want you to notice right over here on the side, arrays have all these built-in methods. They're prototype methods. We'll get into prototype and all that stuff later. All you need to know is any array you make in JavaScript, you can call all of these methods on. So these methods are already there for you. And we can look at, where's for each? There's for each right there, right? This is the one we're going to talk about. So we can click on it. And so whenever you're working with an array and you want it to do something, my suggestion is first, go to the docs. See if it already exists. Because you might be slamming your head against the desk trying to write something that someone way smarter than all of us wrote 10 years ago, right? Or a year ago, whatever, right? So go to the docs, check it out, see if it already exists. It might. It might. Cool. Yes?
Does everyone know these docs, Mozilla docs for these things?
I know of their existence and I've looked at them, but I don't.
So they can be kind of confusing if you've never looked at them because it's pretty dense when you jump in at first. So it takes kind of getting used to reading through them. And also sometimes there's like even much simpler explanation if you just Google something. So sometimes it's better to look like on whatever comes up on your Google results and sort of search through that to look for the simplest version. But then the docs are also quite good once you get good at looking at documentation.
Yeah, so that's a great point, right? Having like hitting one source is going to be frustrating. So yes, please go look at other sources if you don't understand something. I would encourage you to get better at and get more used to looking at the docs. It doesn't have to be your first place to go, but I would definitely keep it in my, like, I think it's a good place to go, especially when we get into Rails and Sinatra and we start talking about these frameworks, React, right? Sometimes going to the source is a good starting point, just to see what's available, right? Again, so here's a similar page. This is these are the Ruby docs. And here's the, again, on the side listed all of the methods that you can call on an array, right? And there's tons of them. And then they give examples here. The Ruby docs I kind of like. Be aware of these. Use them. Yes, they can be frustrating. They can be dense. But the more you dig through them, the easier it'll get. And I think the more value you'll start to see in going right to these docs, at least in the beginning. Cool? So, and then we can actually see here, we're going to talk about in just a second, the Ruby equivalent. Oh, wait, I always forget. It's just called each. It's just called each, but we'll get to it in a second. So here's for each right here. So let's use it real quick to rewrite this. So anything that's an array. So we have programming language, this variable, and it's an array. We've saved an array in here. So that means that we can call for each on it. Cool? Got it? Okay, so now we're like, well, now what, right? For each, what does that do? How does for each know what I want it to do? So right now it's just going to iterate through, but it's not going to do anything. So we have to tell it what to do. So this is where it's this is where the syntax, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys, but it's going to look really different, but they're essentially doing the same things in the two languages, okay? So in JavaScript, we can do this thing that we cannot do in Ruby for the most part, which is we can give one function another function as a parameter. We can do that. That is not a thing that we will be doing in Ruby, okay? So in JavaScript, the way we tell for each what to do is by giving it a function that describes what we want it to do, right? And in this case, we just want it to console log to the screen. So that's the function we're going to write. You can do this two ways. You can write it separately, save it to a variable, and then just pass that variable in, or you can put it directly in there, right? Since this is a really short one, and I think just to illustrate it, I'm just going to put it right in there, okay? And I'll pull it out if we want to see that too. We can do it like this, the old way. But we're not going to, sorry. We're just going to do it the right way. So we're going to pass it a function. This function does not need a name if we're just going to pass it in. We don't have to name it. So here's our function. We're going to give it this function. We're going to, and I'm not doing this right away. We're going to make it multi-line just because I think it's easier to see, but we could do one line. And then we'll console.log. What are we console.logging though?
You have to
Yeah.
for each part thing. I would call it item or val.
Sure.
Like that.
So this is where we're getting to what the function that we're passing for each, that needs a parameter, right? That needs something to do something with. And what it gets is the item. So let me back up just a second. So for each is going to go through. It's going to say, give me what's at value 0. And then it's going to pass that on. So I like to call it like, so I have an array of languages. What I'm going to get here is a single thing. So I'm going to get a language, right? So it's going to take Python, see up here, which is our thing at value 0. For each is going to take Python. It's going to pass it to this function. This function is going to do whatever it wants with language. And then when it's done, for each is going to say, cool, you're done. Now I'm going to grab what's at value 1, which is Ruby, and I'm going to pass that to you. Make sense? So each time, we just want a console log language. So this is going to work exactly the same as that for loop, right? Just run it real quick. And there we go. Are there questions about that? Cool. I thought I saw someone raise their hand, but it was me.
I think
Psyched myself out there.
I think there was callbacks in the pre-work.
Yeah, these callback functions. I'm sure you've seen. I'm sure you guys have probably seen a lot of this before, but I just wanted to hammer it home and make sure that it's in everybody's head. Great. So let's go ahead.
This is doing
The for
this is
loop.
doing what our for loop was doing
Yep.
before. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Cool.
It's just a more elegant way of doing it? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. You're still going to use for loops. There's still so one thing about this is definitely going to iterate through everything, right? Sometimes you're not going to want to do that. You might want to kick out early, which I think you can do with this too. So you'll still end up using for loops, but this is an extremely, you should use this when you can. You should use this when you can. And there are some variants of it that we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, so let's see how it works in Ruby. It's a little bit different. Okay, so we're going to try to do the same thing. So we're going to have programming languages. In Ruby, it looks like this. I'm just going to type it out first, and then I'll go through it, okay? So it's .each. It's not for each. Then we do a space. Then we write do. Then we throw pipes up here. Then what am I getting? I'm getting the language. I'm going to put an end here. And then what do I want to do each time? I just want to print the language. Cool. So, anybody freaking out right now? I hope not. I hope not. Okay, good. Okay, so the beginning looks pretty similar. We're taking our array, we're calling a method on it. Instead of opening brackets or whatever, we're just saying do. What each is going to pull out each time, we can name it whatever we want. I'm just going to name it language, but that's our variable here. Then instead of passing it a function or a method or anything, we just define everything we want it to do down here. Cool? And then it ends. So this does the same thing. Cool? Cool. Any questions? No? Good? Cool. Let's see what we're out of time. Okay, I'm not going to do that. But what I suggest that you do, there are tons of these array methods, and in Ruby, you're going to have two. You're going to have array methods, and then you're going to have a whole nother module, which we'll talk about what that is later. But a whole nother basically list of these methods that's called enumerable methods. So anything that you can iterate over. So they'll work on, these will work on hashes as well. We'll work on hashes as well. Cool. The ones I would highly suggest you take a look at if you have time are map, select, hold on, I wrote them down. Let's see. In Ruby, it's going to be each with index, and then reduce. Reduce is a little bit harder to wrap your head around, but I would take a look at it. Cool. And there is an equivalent for all of these in JavaScript. JavaScript has a map. It has a select. Those are the same. It has a reduce. Each with index. You can get the index. You might just be able to like ask for it like this. Give me the index and it'll give it. But I would have to look it up to make sure. I think it's the same thing. You just put this other parameter here and it'll give you I. But I'm not 100%. I have to look that up.
Yeah, you just have to pass it through the for each. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. All right. So that is kind of, let me make sure that's it. Yeah, that's it. Any other questions before we get started on what are you doing today? Now you're on Bob stuff. What is it?
What does that do?
Which one?
Select in Ruby.
Select will, let's do it just real quick. Select will grab, and let's make sure I can do this right. So with select, what you're going to do down here is you're going to give it you have to give it something that evaluates to either true or false, right? So you're going to ask it something that's either true or false. If it's true, it'll save it into a new array. If it's false, it'll just reject it. So basically, it's just going through and picking the things that you want. It's
called filtering.
There's also a select. I think they're interchangeable because there's definitely there's definitely a select. No, I could have swore there was. Okay, well, either way, that's exactly what it's doing. It's filtering through the array and just returning what you want, right? So we could do one really quick. Let's see. I think I can do. So we'll do language dot. Oh, what is it? I don't want to do that. What can we ask it to be true? Oh, here we can go. We can do contains. P. Pretty sure this will work. Shit, and then printing it is always a thing. I don't think we can just print it like this. I don't think this will work. Let's try it. Yeah. I don't think this will work either because it's going to evaluate whether or not it's true. Yeah. I think we can save it to a variable. But we don't want to do P. We just want to do. All right, I don't want to stumble through this. I would have to put this in a method to make it work, and I don't want to do that right now. Are there any other questions? All right. Do you want me to stumble through this, or do you want to get to work? I'm happy to. I think you guys want to get to work. Cool. Cool.
Is it parent prediction? Are we doing this?
Do you know if it's pair programming or not?
You are peer programming today, I think. You are peer programming. Yes. So find a pair.
It's fun because like I don't want. Maybe I didn't want to answer. I'm happy. I already did this.
I already wrote. Oh yeah, okay. It's the same stuff.
We had it right. We just wrote a giant if else once here instead of this, which is create a dictionary.
You want to split it up over here. Our challenges are personal than a homework reports, but no, we doing everything. Yeah, absolutely. So here's the ridiculous. What we do. Let's look at this. This is what messes up. This is really, I think we get matter of fact, I guess so, right?
Save everything, get it clear.
We can take a break if you want to.
So,
Okay.
well, this is just doing that,
So I'm gonna do
but,
this page.
cleaner.
I'm gonna
We wrote
I'm gonna
like
do this thing
a
where-
red for every single time we want to do this. This is just a key value pairing for everything that we were doing for statements for, and then just a function that iterates through this and does those four functions.
I like
we wrote
to switch them
just for each
I
of
always
them, but instead of having one, list them